Late spring had settled over Burlington like a lullaby. Quiet, soft, too gentle for the storm that had been gathering in my chest for years. From the kitchen window, I watched a squirrel dart across the fence line, its tiny claws slipping as it scrambled upward. My apartment, a modest one-bedroom on the edge of town, was filled with books stacked like barricades. Part-time teaching papers sat in uneven piles on the table, red ink scrawled across them like surgical scars. And I was alone. Again. That morning, while deleting junk emails, a name stopped me. Aunt Lucinda had forwarded a message about a family brunch this Sunday. The message wasn't addressed to me directly. No greeting, no subject line, just a lazy forward, as if she wasn't sure I was supposed to see it. I opened my text messages and scrolled. No invitation in the family chat, no updates, nothing. That's when it hit me. I wasn't in the family chat anymore. I opened the group on instinct, the same way someone reaches for a light switch in a room that no longer exists. The name of the group was still there. Castellano Crew. But when I tapped it, the screen flickered and closed. Removed. I called my mother, pretending not to notice the tremor in my voice. Hey, did you guys change the family chat group or something? A pause. Long enough to let my stomach knot. Oh, sweetie. We figured you were busy with your things, she said, voice soft but not kind. Lucinda mentioned you weren't really responding much lately. That's because no one tagged me in anything. Another pause. Well, you've been distant. We didn't want to overwhelm you. In our house, being removed from the family chat wasn't just digital housekeeping. It was a message. You no longer belong at the table. I hung up. No accusations, no explanations. Just a dull hum behind my ribs that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't an accident. It was a quiet vote. Unanimous. 2 years ago, over a dinner none of us would ever mention again, I told them I was leaving my PhD program. 8 years into it. One paper away from the defense, burned out, disillusioned, exhausted. I had stared down the barrel of academia and blinked first. My father had set his fork down slowly, the clink against the plate louder than anything he said that night. He didn't say much, just looked at me like I was an alien who'd landed in the wrong family. Sophrona, my sister, the untouchable one, offered a half smile that didn't reach her eyes. And my mother, always the diplomat, had offered, well, I guess not everyone is cut out for long-haul success. They didn't argue. They didn't scream. That would have been easier to answer. Instead, they let silence wrap around the room like a noose. And that silence didn't end when dessert came. It just found a new home online. This brunch, they called it Spring Renewal, was being hosted at the community center where Sophrona had recently helped launch a scholarship fund in her name. Everyone was going. Even relatives I hadn't heard from since Obama's first term. I stared at the forwarded email on my laptop. I could have ignored it, played the victim, claimed I had prior commitments. But a voice inside me, deeper and sharper than pride, said, go. Not to confront, not to plead, just to be seen. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of cloudless sky that makes you suspicious. I wore neutral tones, no lipstick, hair pulled back. I rehearsed polite nods in my mirror, soft smiles, phrases that could glide past conflict like a canoe over still water. The community hall was dressed up like a Pinterest dream, white tablecloths, floral centerpieces, buffet trays steaming with quiche and maple sausage. I walked in alone, clutching my purse like a lifeline. No one greeted me. No one pointed to where I should sit. At the check-in table, I searched for my name tag. Rows of laminated names smiled back at me. Sophrona Wolf, Dr. Vincent Marlowe, Elena Castellano. And then, at the very edge of the table, I saw it. Guest. Black marker, no last name. I placed it on my chest like a scarlet letter and walked into the room. I found a seat near the back, next to a cousin who gave me a quick nod before turning back to her phone. No one asked about my work. No one mentioned the paper I'd spent 2 years crafting. They didn't ask how I paid rent, how I slept, what I dreamed about. And then came the toast. My brother Marcus stood at the front of the room, champagne glass in hand, his tie perfectly knotted, his teeth polished to lawyer white. "Let's raise a glass," he said, "to the family's brightest stars." Cheers erupted. He motioned toward Sophrona, who blushed just enough to appear modest. "And to those," Marcus continued, his eyes brushing past me without stopping, "who are exploring other paths, may they find clarity." Laughter. Polite, practiced, rehearsed. I raised my glass because that's what you do when the dagger is dipped in charm. I smiled. I swallowed the burn. I wasn't surprised, just exhausted. They weren't misunderstanding me. They were writing me out of the story, not with anger, with redirection. I didn't storm out. I didn't cry in the restroom. I simply waited for the event to end, said goodbye to no one, and stepped into the cool April air. That's when my phone buzzed. New email. Subject: Oxford Invitation. Quantum Systems Leadership Opportunity. Ms. Marlowe, we've reviewed your paper. We'd like to discuss a leadership opportunity. I stared at the screen, unsure whether to laugh or cry. And that's when I knew. I had to go back. The email from Oxford still glowed on my phone as I sat in my parked car outside the event hall. I hadn't opened it again. Not yet. It sat in my inbox like a secret I wasn't ready to share, even with myself. My hands gripped the steering wheel, not because I was nervous about the brunch, but because the last thing I expected to feel after years of professional silence was being seen. Why now? Why me? I tucked the thought away for later. I stepped out of the car, brushing off the front of my pale gray blazer, then reached for the name tag table just inside the doors. There were rows of printed names arranged alphabetically in plastic sleeves. Castellano, Elena. Marlowe, Vincent. Wolf, Sophrona. Neat, elegant, and unmistakable. Then I found mine, except it didn't say Roxalana, or even Roxy. It said guest. Just like that, 5 bold letters that confirmed what I already knew. I peeled it from its backing and stuck it on, right over my heart. The room was an ocean of curated smiles and small talk. White linen-draped tables glimmered under warm, staged lighting. Someone had paid too much for a string quartet to play in the background. This wasn't a brunch. It was a theater production, and I was the extra who wandered on stage during a scene that didn't include her character. No one greeted me with real enthusiasm. There were nods, shallow smiles, eyebrows lifted as if trying to recall whether I was supposed to be here. I found an open chair at a table near the back and sat down without waiting for an invitation. It didn't take long before Uncle Frank, holding his third mimosa, wandered over. He stared at my chest before noticing my face. "Still doing books or something?" I took a slow sip from my water glass. "Still rebuilding from scratch. Some structures take time." He blinked once, gave a vague, "That's good," and wandered off to talk about stock portfolios with Marcus and his cronies. They didn't ask what I'd been working on. No one brought up the article I'd published last fall. Not a single soul was curious about what it meant to walk away from something that had defined your entire 20s just to start over. There was a call for a group photo. Everyone stood, buzzing and shifting into neat rows under the decorative arbor in the courtyard. I hesitated, but someone patted the empty space beside them without looking me in the eye. I stepped into the frame, trying to make myself small, the guest label still visible like a post-it note stuck to someone's resume during a job interview they didn't ask for. A cousin nudged me gently, just enough to shift me further to the side. "Sorry," she muttered. "Need room for the front row." I nodded and moved. Flash. That evening, after tossing my heels onto the rug and peeling off the guest badge, I scrolled through Instagram. The photo had already gone up. 3 generations of excellence. Every family member was tagged. Except me. I wasn't just pushed to the edge. I had been cropped out entirely. The comments rolled in. "So proud of you, Sophrona. 3 generations of brilliance. True legacy right here." I set the phone down, stared at the ceiling. It didn't hurt like it used to. It was something colder now, cleaner. You can only make someone feel small if you still need them to see you. And maybe I didn't anymore. I picked up the phone again, not to reply, not to scroll. I opened the Oxford email, reread the words: leadership opportunity, review of my paper, serious interest, an invitation to something that didn't need my last name to grant me access. Before I could respond, my phone lit up with a new text message. From Sophrona. Would appreciate if you didn't comment on the photo. It's curated for the scholarship campaign. Hope you understand. Curated. That word settled into my chest like a stone in a shallow pond, deliberate, edited, designed to sell something, and that something wasn't me. I stared at her message, then typed one word. Understood. But I didn't send it. Instead, I whispered to no one in particular, "You're not the only one who can curate an image." It wasn't about being left out anymore. It was about being erased, and I wasn't going to let that happen again. I didn't respond to Sophrona's message, not because I didn't have words, God knows I had them, but because I understood exactly what she was trying to do. Control the narrative, curate the damage, maintain the illusion that I was never part of the family photo to begin with. That word, curated, stuck in my throat like stale bread. I sat there staring at the text, remembering all the other curated moments that had shaped our family legacy. It wasn't new. I just hadn't seen it so clearly until now. My phone dimmed in my hand, and instead of locking it, I let the screen fade while my mind wandered backward, to the beginning. Not the moment I left school. Not the night I got cropped out of the picture. No, it began before that. 3 years ago, at one of our rare full-family barbecues, I had overheard something I wasn't supposed to hear. It was a humid July afternoon, the kind where sweat clung to your back even in the shade. I had stepped away from the table to refill the lemonade when I caught my grandmother's voice carrying softly from behind the patio screen. "She's bright, but too sensitive. You can't bet on someone who folds." She was talking to Aunt Bernice. My name hadn't been mentioned, but it didn't have to be. Something inside me broke that day, and not in the dramatic, shattering way movies like to portray. It was quieter, like a seam tearing under the weight of repetition. Up until that moment, I had believed Grandma Valmai saw me, that her quiet nods and soft pats on the hand meant she had my back. Turns out, love came with disclaimers. I went back to the table and smiled through the next 2 hours, ate the potato salad, laughed at jokes I didn't find funny, pretended that the sting of betrayal wasn't digging into my chest like an old rusted nail. That barbecue was the last time I volunteered for any planning meetings or family fundraisers. I told myself it was about space and focusing on my own path, but the truth was simpler. I was tired of being the blank canvas others scribbled their doubts onto. In our family, exclusion doesn't come with slammed doors or screaming matches. It arrives in suggestion. In phrases like, "Let's not put pressure on her," or "She needs time." It's dressed up in concern, wrapped in polite avoidance, and delivered with a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Not long after that barbecue, I was told the scholarship fund, originally meant to be under my guidance, had been reassigned to Sophrona. No family meeting, no input from me, just a group decision, passed along like a weather update. "We didn't want you to feel pressured," my mother had said when I called her, voice sugar-sweet and full of pretended sympathy. "You're still figuring things out. I had a master's degree, a pending publication, and a research theory that had caught the attention of international academics. But because I hadn't done it their way, hadn't done it through their networks, it didn't count. I didn't count. I didn't argue, didn't fight for the fund. I just smiled, thanked her for the update, and hung up. That was the day I stopped expecting them to recognize my work. The day I realized they weren't trying to protect me, they were cutting me out. People can only bench you if you agree to stay on the sidelines. That night, I dusted off my laptop and opened the paper Oxford had referenced. I had buried it for over a year, told myself it wasn't ready. But truthfully, I hadn't been ready. Not to be rejected again, and certainly not by the people who claimed to care. I worked until 3 in the morning, revised graphs, updated citations, tweaked conclusions. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was mine. By the time the sun was rising, painting the kitchen walls in soft gold, I felt something I hadn't in months: forward motion. Later that afternoon, As I refilled my mug and checked my inbox, I saw a new message flagged in bold. The sender. Trust admin at marlofoundation.org. My heart skipped for a second. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they realized something had been mishandled. I opened the email. It was short, clinical. Dear Ms. Marlowe, please note that per the new structure approved by the board, all scholarship-related communications will now be handled through Mrs. Sophrona Wolf. Any questions should be directed to her office. Additionally, the Marlowe Initiative for Innovation has been rebranded as the Wolf Legacy Fund. There was a CC to Sophrona, no greeting, no explanation, just a transfer of ownership and a burial of what little legacy I had been allowed to claim. I whispered aloud to no one, the words sliding out like smoke. They're rewriting me out of my own story. But here's the thing about stories. They can be rewritten both ways. If they want to erase me from their future, I'll remove myself from their present. The words sat with me like stone, unyielding, not dramatic, not whispered, not tearful, just final. That night, I opened my calendar and RSVP'd to the Burlington Community Recognition Night, an event I would have normally avoided. But this time, I said yes. Not because I needed validation, but because I was done being invisible in rooms where my name had built the damn table. When I arrived at the hotel ballroom, it was already buzzing, the kind of energy that comes from polished teeth and donor checks. I had been invited by an old college friend, Naomi, now a city council member, who remembered the work I'd done in predictive models for education equity. She greeted me warmly, but I knew from the glances around us that I didn't belong to the dominant narrative here. Sophrona, of course, was already holding court, graceful, calculated, a natural manipulator in a silk-sheath dress. I saw her across the room with a tight circle of executives, her tone polished with just enough humility to sound rehearsed. It was only minutes before a mutual acquaintance stopped beside me, glass of white wine in hand. "Oh, this is Roxy, right?" she said to the group. "Sophrona's sister. She's figuring things out, right?" I smiled, not sweetly. "I teach, and I publish, but sure, let's go with that." There was a beat of silence, too short to call awkward, but just long enough to bruise. No one asked what I taught. No one asked what I'd published. That moment was the full arc of my place in this family and this city. Not silenced, just edited out with a smile. Later, as I drifted through conversations, I caught a familiar voice behind me, Sophrona, her tone hushed but clear. "She's the creative type," she said to a man in a gray suit. "We give her something to do, to keep her engaged." I froze. It wasn't the words, it was the surgical precision of how she said them. As if I were a sheltered niece, not the woman who helped write the foundational grant proposal for the very scholarship now bearing her name. That kind of cut doesn't bleed, it calcifies. I didn't storm out, I didn't make a scene, but the champagne flute I set on the nearest table might as well have been a dropped mic. The next evening, I visited my mother's house. Her living room smelled of potpourri and lemon oil, overly familiar, unnervingly distant. She poured tea into the good china. Of course she did. "I want to talk about the trust," I said, cutting to the chase. "And I want to talk about what Sophrona said at the gala." She sighed, already defensive. "She didn't mean it that way. You know your sister. She's just better at those public things." "Better at rewriting history?" I snapped. "She's not just walking ahead of me, Mom. She's kicking dirt in my face while doing it." My mother looked down at her cup. "Your time will come, Roxalana." Not everyone arrives the same way. I pushed back from the table, no longer interested in sipping politeness. Some of us weren't given a map. Some of us had our destination changed mid-journey. When I got home, I tossed my coat over the chair, ready to shut it all down when I saw a new email notification. Subject line: Follow-up, Collaboration Opportunity. It was from Professor Garrett, my old advisor from Boston. I clicked it open. "Hi, Roxy. I'd reached out to your mother last week to see if you might be interested in rejoining the data simulation project. She told me you were in a delicate place and not quite ready. I hope you're doing well. If I've misunderstood, feel free to reach out directly." My stomach clenched. I reread the paragraph twice. She had spoken for me, again, behind my back, with the tone of concern that cuts deeper than any critique. Without hesitation, I clicked reply. Hi, Professor Garrett. Thank you for following up. I am absolutely interested. Oh, I've never been more ready. I just needed to stop letting people speak for me. I hit send. Then I sat back in my chair and exhaled. This wasn't just about getting back into research. This was about claiming the microphone, the right to narrate my own damn story. I picked up my phone and opened a new message thread with Sophrona. Next time you talk about me publicly, get your facts straight, or I will. There's a difference between telling your story and letting someone else write it. The words lingered in my mind long after I sent that message to Sophrona. I stared at the screen, not because I needed to reread what I'd written, but because I wanted to remember how it felt to say something without waiting for permission. The weekend came with sunshine and the scent of charcoal drifting through the neighborhood. My mother's side had planned a casual family picnic at the city park. Burgers, bean salad, kids running around with half-inflated soccer balls. I'd considered skipping it, but some part of me wanted to see it through. Not for them, for me. When I arrived, I parked near the edge of the lot and watched for a moment. Folding chairs clustered in circles, paper plates littered picnic tables, laughter carried from the playground, kids squealing over sticky popsicles and overturned coolers. I walked in unnoticed, which was becoming a pattern. No one paused to greet me. No one asked how I was. I spotted a seat near my uncle and slid into it with a polite nod. Hey there, Rox, Jamela, my cousin, called out from across the table. Tell these guys about that crazy algorithm thing you were working on back in school. I looked up, surprised. She was smiling, gesturing to a few unfamiliar faces, probably new in-laws or family friends. Before I could speak, she jumped in. Actually, you know what's wild? My brother's startup just got funding, real money. And guess what they're building off of? One of those old formulas Rox used to scribble on napkins during grad school. She always had the brain, just didn't have the timing. She laughed. They all did. I blinked, frozen. That wasn't a napkin doodle. It was a preliminary draft of a quantum data compression model I'd developed over a sleepless summer, the same one I'd later refined into a paper Oxford had flagged as foundational. But Jamela said it with such ease, as if it were a trivia fact. And the others around her smiled as if she'd just given me a compliment. They'll let you exist, I thought, as long as you stay the side character. I smiled, but not kindly. I took a slow breath, my food untouched. It got worse. About an hour later, Sophrona crouched beside her daughter near the swings. I didn't hear the whole exchange, but I caught enough. Not everyone finishes school, she whispered. Sometimes people drop out, like Aunt Rox, but you don't have to worry. You're focused. You'll stay the course. Minutes later, the child ran over and shouted loud enough for half the family to hear. Mommy says if you're like Aunt Rox, you don't have to finish school, but it's better not to risk it. The silence afterward was electric. A few chuckles, a cough. Someone shifted in a chair. I didn't flinch. Not failure, risk. That's how they had reframed my life, my choices. I was no longer the cautionary tale. I was the bad bet, the danger to avoid. I stood up. Hey, I said, not raising my voice, but enough to stop conversations around me. Can I say something real quick? Everyone turned, eyes cautious. I'm done letting my absence be a blank check for your assumptions. A hush fell over the picnic. I dropped out of a PhD program I no longer believed in. I walked away from a system that consumed people like firewood and called it progress. Since then, I've published independently, been invited to speak at international symposiums, and just this week, I was contacted by Oxford. Yes, that Oxford. I paused, letting the weight of it settle. And if you ever wondered why I didn't tell you before, it's because every time I opened my mouth, I saw the way you looked at me, like I was writing a fantasy instead of a future. No one moved, not a whisper. I'm not here to make you proud. I'm here to stop being small for your comfort. Then I sat back down and picked up my sandwich like I hadn't just shattered the table. The conversations resumed, quieter, slower. My mother didn't say anything, neither did Sophrona. As the afternoon waned, I stood up to leave. As I gathered my things, a teenage cousin, Max, walked up behind me, hesitant. Is it true? He asked. You publish something they use at MIT now? I turned to him. He wasn't mocking, just curious. Yes, I said, offering a small smile. But they won't be the last. I left the park that day, not with my head held high, but with my name intact. If they wouldn't give me a seat at their table, I'd build one they couldn't afford to ignore. If the world wants to know me, why do I keep chasing the people who never asked? That question circled in my head like a wasp on a windless afternoon. It had echoed ever since Max's innocent curiosity about MIT. I'd smiled for him, but inside, something had cracked open. Not pain, not anger. Something colder, clearer. The day after the picnic, I decided to drive by the house I grew up in. I hadn't visited in a while, not since my father had undergone some renovation of priorities, as he liked to call it. Still, I wasn't prepared for what I found. A bold red sign stood in the front yard, for sale, under contract. I sat there for a long minute, engine idling. The porch light had been replaced. New shutters painted a cheerful colonial blue. The tree I used to climb had been cut down. I called my mother. "Oh, Roxy, we didn't think you'd mind," she said, her voice lined with faux sweetness. "Your father and I figured it made sense to simplify." The upkeep was just too much. Besides, you're not planning to move back, are you? That house held my notebooks, my research scribbles, the whiteboards I used in college to visualize quantum links. Even my childhood bookshelf, filled with hardcovers that still smelled of glue and ambition. "You boxed up my life and didn't even check if I wanted the key to lock the door myself," I said, low. "We left your things in the garage," she added quickly, "just the stuff that seemed meaningful." I didn't respond. I just hung up. Later that night, I drove back and found the garage door slightly ajar. Inside were stacks of unlabeled boxes, bent, dusty, soggy at the corners. My name was scrawled on one in faded Sharpie. I peeled open a flap. My thesis drafts were bent in half. Pages stuck together with moisture. Photos from undergrad were dumped between old coffee mugs and tangled cords. I called my father. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "You didn't ask to be involved," he replied flatly. "We assumed you were past that phase." "No," I said. "I stopped asking because you stopped answering." I didn't cry. But something in me shifted. Back home, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. A new email waited for me. Subject line: "Congratulations, peer review approved." My research paper on neural quantum correlation, submitted under my initials and no affiliation, had been accepted and queued for publication. I reread the email 3 times. Then I forwarded the news to the family group chat. I had re-added myself weeks ago. No reply came, except for a single thumbs-up emoji from Aunt Candace. That was it. The next day, Marcus posted on LinkedIn. His caption read, "Proud of my team for developing a new approach to data mapping that's caught real attention in the industry. Persistence pays off." I clicked on the article he linked. It mirrored an idea I had shared with him over coffee 2 years earlier, down to the visual model. He hadn't just borrowed the concept, he'd airbrushed me out of it entirely. "It's not rejection," I whispered. "It's erasure by silence." I closed the tab and opened a new one. That evening, I launched a Substack newsletter. Systems Within Systems was the title. I uploaded a breakdown of my paper, a reflection on the ethics of academic appropriation, and a call to reimagine authorship. Within 48 hours, it had 3,000 subscribers. Comments flooded in. Students, researchers, anonymous readers. They quoted lines back to me. They asked real questions. They thanked me. If they didn't care about my words, I thought, I'd let strangers be moved by them instead. I stopped sending updates to the group chat. I archived it from my phone. Let them curate their silence however they wanted. The night I hit publish on my 3rd newsletter issue, my phone buzzed. An email from someone I didn't know. Subject: Miss Marlowe. Inquiry from Oxford Quantum Department. The preview line made my heart stop. "I read your paper. We need to talk." I stared at the screen, no longer wondering whether I was ready. They didn't see me coming, but the world just might. Maybe I didn't need their validation. But I deserved credit. I whispered those words to myself as I sat at my desk that night, the Oxford email still open on my screen. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I just sat there, pulse even, hands steady. This wasn't shock. This was precision. The next morning, I was still holding that clarity like a sharp blade when a text popped up on my phone from my cousin Hamela. Thought you might be interested in something stable. Followed by a link. I clicked it. Retail, entry level, tech assistant at a chain store in town. I stared at the listing, then the message, then back again. Stable. That was her word for it. Not brilliant, not ambitious, not worthy of anything more. Stable. They weaponize concern better than any insult. I didn't reply. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I clicked over to my draft folder, opened the latest version of my paper, and uploaded it to an academic preprint repository. Official, time-stamped open access. Then I opened a new tab and began drafting my formal response to Oxford. Dear Dr. Kellerman, thank you for your interest. I'd be honored to discuss the opportunity further. Please let me know what times work for a virtual meeting. No drama, no emojis, just the facts. They tried to clip my wings with job ads. I responded with published results. Later that afternoon, I got a call from an old friend in academia, Sarah Green, who now worked at MIT. Hey, she said, voice hesitant. I just wanted you to know, something weird crossed my desk. My stomach dropped. She continued, it's a flyer from the Wolf Legacy Fund. They're presenting at a donor gala next week, and I recognized something on it. Your graph, from your paper, exact same layout, different font. I asked her to send it over. When it hit my inbox, I opened the PDF. There it was, my quantum correlation map, stripped of my name, slightly edited, but unmistakably mine. Even the color gradient was the same. Diagrams I'd spent nights perfecting, now stamped beneath Sophrona's smiling face on a glossy invitation. They weren't just erasing me. They were building on the ashes of my silence. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I printed out the flyer, pulled open my drawer, and began assembling the receipts. Timestamps from my draft. Emails with academic peers. Original file metadata. I had backups of every version, every iteration, because when you're a woman in STEM, especially one who steps outside the traditional path, you learn to document more than you discover. In a room full of silence, evidence speaks loudest. By midnight, I had a folder labeled Proof, Wolf Legacy Misuse. But I didn't hit send. I wasn't going to waste this moment on an email. No, I needed a stage. The next day, I received a formal RSVP for the Wolf Legacy Fund Donor Gala, sent to me directly. Sophrona had forwarded it from her foundation email, no note attached, but the message was clear. She didn't know I knew. Perfect. Let them walk into the spotlight with stolen light. I printed my RSVP, folded it neatly, and whispered to myself, the more they speak, the more they show who they really are. Some truths aren't whispered. They're projected onto screens. In front of everyone they tried to fool. They invited me to watch. I'd be on stage instead. That thought followed me into the Burlington Cultural Hall like a shadow with purpose. I had chosen a navy dress, structured, sharp, and deliberate. It wasn't about beauty. It was about presence. The entry foyer buzzed with conversation. Laughter clinked against wine glasses. Sophrona's name echoed through introductions and whispered compliments. I walked past the welcome table without stopping. My RSVP was already on file. Inside the main hall, the lights dimmed. The MC stepped forward, all charisma and practiced pauses. Tonight, he began, we honor legacy, not just in name, but in impact. I stood at the back, arms folded, watching the screen as the tribute video began. The title card read, Wolf Legacy Fund, Innovation in Motion. I didn't need a seat. I needed evidence. As the video played, I saw my work, slides, charts, visualizations I had spent years refining. They had been slightly altered, recolored, given a new font, but it was mine. Every line of logic, every visual model. And then came the name, Rebecca M. A placeholder, a ghost. No one on the stage flinched. No one in the audience blinked. But I didn't step forward. Not yet. Instead, I pulled the USB drive from my clutch and walked quietly to the AV table. The technician, young, overworked, underpaid, raised his eyebrows when I whispered, "Play this, now." He hesitated. I nodded once. He inserted the drive. The screen flickered, and then my version began. Time-stamped, dated, side by side with the original, full titles, proper citations, audio commentary I'd recorded to explain the frameworks. The audience leaned forward. I heard murmurs, chairs shifted, eyebrows lifted, conversations stilled. I didn't walk to the microphone. I walked to the center of the stage. No introduction, no apology. "Sometimes," I said, "you don't reclaim your name. You remind them you never gave it up." Silence, thick and wide. "But since I have your attention, let me tell you a few things." I looked directly at Sophrona, who sat 2 rows back, her mouth set in the kind of smile you wear when a camera is on you and a train is coming. This data, this theory, was mine, documented, peer-reviewed, recognized outside these walls long before it was packaged and handed to you. Gasps now. Shifting. The MC stepped forward, but I held up a hand. "And one more thing," I continued. 3 weeks ago, Oxford University received an anonymous email attempting to sabotage my candidacy for a position in their quantum department. The email questioned my emotional stability, implied I was mentally unfit for leadership. The room went cold. We traced the metadata. I didn't say the name. I didn't have to. I turned to the screen again, where my face now filled the frame in a clip from my recent interview, where I'd spoken about resilience in science, about being underestimated, about building without blueprints. And then I stepped off stage. As I passed by the front row, I didn't stop at my parents' table. My father's jaw was tight. My mother's napkin was clenched in her lap. No one clapped, but 2 professors from the back row approached me before I reached the exit. "You just turned an erasure into a keynote," one of them said. I gave a nod, not to thank them, just to mark the moment. Outside, the night air hit cooler than expected. I stood by the fountain, letting the noise from inside fade behind the glass doors. My phone buzzed, a message from my father. "You didn't have to embarrass everyone." I stared at it, then I typed, "I didn't, you did." Truth isn't always loud, but it echoes longest when spoken with evidence. The truth doesn't embarrass decent people. It humbles them. I stared at my father's message, letting it dim with the screen. No reply, no reaction. Just the quiet click of my phone sliding onto the coffee table beside a stack of mail I hadn't opened in days. Truth didn't embarrass me anymore. What embarrassed me was ever believing silence was protection. I spent the next morning in a haze of unread emails and lukewarm coffee. My inbox was overflowing. Half were from strangers, academics, journalists, researchers, offering congratulations, collaboration, or simply saying, "Thank you for speaking." The other half were from relatives I hadn't heard from since I'd been scrubbed from the family fundraiser. Some said nothing at all. Others sent half-hearted apologies masked as compliments. "Wow, didn't know you were working on something so serious. I saw your name on Twitter. Big move." A voicemail from my mother played as I sorted laundry on the bed. "You should have told us how much this meant to you." I paused the message halfway through. Because the truth? They knew. They just didn't care to ask. Later that evening, I heard a soft chime from my inbox again, this time from an address I recognized. Oxford. No subject line fluff, no empty praise, just the offer. Formal, direct, signed and sealed. I was to become the Associate Dean for Interdisciplinary Quantum Studies. The ceremony was scheduled for the following month. Accommodations would be covered, relocation assistance arranged. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply sat back and read the line again. It wasn't a win over them. It was a win for me. Still, the world had a sense of timing I could never trust. That afternoon, a local columnist from the Burlington Gazette called and asked for an interview. "I've been loosely following the Wolf Legacy Fund story," she said, "and your name keeps coming up, usually off the record." I hesitated. "What exactly do you want to know? How did you stay quiet so long?" I thought for a moment, then smiled. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. The article ran 2 days later, not front page, but featured online. It hit a nerve, especially on academic Twitter, where debates flared over intellectual theft, visibility, and gendered erasure. For once, my name was trending without being twisted into a cautionary tale. Still, the fractures in my family didn't heal. They just grew sharper. My brother sent a single line in an email. "Guess you showed us." No subject, no signature. I didn't reply. But what surprised me was the letter from my grandmother. Written by hand, shaky cursive but deliberate. "I'm old enough to admit when I was wrong." And I was. She didn't say what exactly, but maybe that was the point. She let me define it. That night, I packed the first of my boxes. Nothing big. Just the essentials: laptop, journals, books that didn't remind me of who they wanted me to be. As I folded a sweater into the bottom of my suitcase, a small photo slipped out from the lining. It was of me and Sophrona, probably junior high. She had her arm around me. We were smiling like sisters in a catalog ad, not realizing one of us was already being rehearsed for the spotlight, the other for the shadows. On the back, in faded ink, was written, "It was never supposed to be like this." I held the photo between my fingers, unsure whether to keep it or let it go. "But it was," I whispered. "And now, it never will be again." Some memories are meant to haunt. Others are warnings dressed as nostalgia. I held the torn photo of me and Sophrona between my fingers, its faded corners curled like a page dog-eared for a story I no longer wanted to reread. The back read, "It was never supposed to be like this." But it was. 2 days after I tucked the picture into the final moving box, a thick envelope arrived from a law office with a name I recognized but hadn't heard in years. My father's estate attorney. I broke the seal slowly, expecting legal jargon, maybe paperwork about a foundation transfer or lingering tax issue. Instead, it was a copy of his updated will. I scanned the paragraph that mattered. Miss Roxalana Marlowe is to be excluded from all distributions, financial or material, due to prolonged instability and lack of contribution to the family's public legacy. That last part? That was the gut punch. Prolonged instability. Like mental illness was a performance. Like leaving a program, taking a breath, and building something better on my own terms was some kind of contagious failure. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I was so damn tired. If they wanted to cut me out, they could have just said it to my face. Instead, they made it a footnote in a lawyer's document. I didn't tell anyone, not yet. I needed time to digest it. Time to make sure my reaction wasn't another gift they could weaponize. 3 days later, I stood on my parents' porch. No knock, no warning, just me, their oldest daughter, suitcase in hand, and questions long overdue. My father opened the door. His expression didn't shift. "We're busy," he said flatly. I saw the will. He didn't blink. It was a family decision. "No," I said. "It was a coward's convenience." He didn't argue, just stepped aside and left the door open behind him. That was our goodbye. Thanksgiving came and went. No call, no email, not even a forwarded joke from Aunt Candace. I spent the day in my apartment, packing the last of my winter clothes and reheating sweet potatoes I'd made too much of, out of habit. That night, scrolling social media, I saw the post. A cousin had uploaded a photo from the Marlowe family gathering, table filled, kids smiling, everyone posed like some Hallmark commercial. The caption read, "Thankful for those who show up, who give, who matter." No one tagged me, no one mentioned me. I had been digitally ghosted by my own DNA. It didn't hurt the way it used to. It was quieter, heavier. In the silence, I found resolve. That weekend, I cleaned out the last of my shelves. My degrees, research binders. The original outline of the paper Oxford had validated. One framed photo of my mentor, Sarah Green. That stayed. The rest, I put it in a box, walked it out back, and burned it. They cut me out. I carved myself in somewhere better. The following Monday, the keynote speech I gave at the gala was published in Scientific American's online issue. A week later, an editor reached out. "We'd like a long-form piece, something personal but academic, provocative." I wrote it in 3 nights. The title? The Dead Weight Theory, What Happens When Genius Isn't Packaged for Approval. It went viral. The term dead weight started trending. Emails flooded in from women in STEM, non-traditional scholars, and people like me, those who'd been dismissed for not checking the boxes someone else built. Then, just as I began booking my flight to the UK, an email popped up from my aunt. Subject line, Urgent, your father. Roxy, your father collapsed. He's in the ICU. He's asking for you. I read it 3 times. Then I closed the tab and gently zipped my suitcase. The girl they buried alive is not the one flying home. He was asking for me, not because he finally understood, but because he finally couldn't ignore me. I closed my laptop without finishing the sentence I had started. Outside the window, Burlington's sky dimmed into a burnt pink, the kind of sunset you forget to admire when you've been staring at silence for too long. I slipped on a black coat, pulled my hair back in a low knot, and grabbed my keys without thinking. The hospital smelled like every memory I'd ever tried to avoid. Bleach, dry air, hallways lined with people waiting to hear something they already feared. I moved past the reception desk without hesitation, murmured my name to the nurse at the ICU door. "You're her," the nurse said. Not a question. I nodded once. "Room 6. He's conscious." The walk down the hallway felt longer than it was. I wasn't sure if I was ready to see him or just tired of pretending it mattered. I paused at the doorway. He looked smaller in that bed, older, yes, but not in the way age normally wears someone down. His shoulders didn't command, his eyes didn't challenge. He turned when he heard my steps. "Roxalana." I didn't sit, just folded my arms. He cleared his throat, voice dry. "I didn't know what to do with you." I met his gaze, steady. "You weren't supposed to." That hung there like unfinished business. No apologies, no justifications, just the reality of who we had become to each other. He glanced toward the heart monitor. "Don't let bitterness write your legacy. You're more than revenge." I didn't answer. Because I already knew that. We didn't hug. There were no tears. Just silence. And somehow, for the first time in my life, it wasn't mine to carry. I walked out without looking back. Sometimes healing isn't reuniting, it's releasing. At home, I found a package at my door, a brown box with a handwritten label, Valmai M., my grandmother. Inside was a journal, worn and faded. I opened it to a page marked with a satin ribbon. Maybe I was wrong about the quiet one. Just that, scribbled in the margins like a confession never meant to be mailed. I closed the book, not gently, not harshly, just, finally. The next morning, I packed the last of my things, my degree, a leather-bound notebook, a photo of me at the Oxford Symposium banner, alone but whole. Everything else, I left. You don't owe your growth to the people who watered you with guilt. I said it aloud as I zipped the suitcase. The phone buzzed. Sophrona, safe travels. You were always going to outgrow us. No apology, just a statement dressed in closure. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. A cab pulled up just after noon. I loaded my bags myself. The driver, an older man with kind eyes and a slight Boston accent, asked as we pulled onto the highway. "First time leaving home?" I watched the Vermont skyline blur through the window. "No," I said, my voice calm. "First time choosing where I'm going. They tried to bury me, but I was never soil. I was fire." The taxi curved through Oxford's old stone streets like a thread through history. I leaned into the window, watching as spires rose between trees and golden light bathed every ancient brick in quiet reverence. My name was printed on the folder in my lap. Professor Roxalana Marlowe. And for once, it wasn't followed by a parenthetical comparison to my sister. When I stepped out in front of the administration building, a staff member greeted me at the door, clipboard in hand, smile warm, but not performative. "We've been waiting for you, Professor Marlowe," she said. She didn't ask if I had family in academia, didn't stumble over my title, just said it straight, like it had always belonged to me. I stood for a moment, letting the words settle. This is mine. Later that afternoon, during orientation lunch, I sat in the back corner of the dining hall, grateful for quiet. The kind of quiet that came with knowing no one here had decided who I was before I opened my mouth. A student approached, nervously holding a tray. "Excuse me, are you Roxy Marlowe?" I nodded. "I read your paper last semester on interrelational architecture in quantum systems. It changed everything for me. You're the reason I applied here." I blinked, unsure what to say. She continued, "You made someone like me feel like this field wasn't just for men in suits." That moment hit harder than applause ever could. When strangers see your light, it means it was real all along. That evening, I received a video call from my aunt. She was checking in, asking if I might consider coming to the next family birthday. I gave a polite decline, not out of coldness, but peace. In the background, her grandson's voice piped up. "Why didn't they clap when you talked at the party?" I smiled. Sometimes grown-ups get scared when someone tells the truth too clearly. The next week, I was invited to speak at a global education summit. The keynote title? Dead Weight Doesn't Lead, but I do. I didn't tell anyone back home. On stage, I told my story, not out of spite, but necessity. I talked about erasure, about surviving systems that never saw you coming, about the lies whispered in dinner tables dressed as concern, and what it means to take the microphone anyway. When I finished, the entire room stood. Faces I didn't know, names I didn't grow up hearing, but they clapped because I had carved something that belonged to me, and it resonated. No one from my family was there. And for the first time, it didn't sting. Back in my flat, I updated my professional bio, Dean of Quantum Systems, Oxford, former dead weight, and the messages began. Not from those who had ignored me, but from those who had quietly watched, quietly related, quietly waited for someone to say what they hadn't dared to. Women. First-gen students. Adults estranged from their families. Professors who said, "You reminded me of what I forgot." Legacy isn't what they remember. It's what you ignite in others. Before leaving for my next lecture, I placed one last envelope in the outgoing mail. Inside was a copy of my keynote transcript. No note, no signature, just one line written on the envelope. You called me a cautionary tale. I turned it into a keynote. There is no next chapter. Because this one, I wrote it myself.